In April of 1894, a young man from Pittsburgh left Tabriz in Persia, headed for the turbulent lands of the Ottoman Empire, on his bicycle. Bicycling was then a craze in the United States as the invention of the safety bicycle had transformed the once dangerous sport into a pastime for the masses and inspired the young man with his camera in hand to attempt to cycle around the world by himself. His voyage garnered attention from newspapers around the world, and that attention only increased when he mysteriously disappeared in the rough terrain of Turkish Armenia, and his history that deserves to be remembered. Frank Lenz was born in 1867 in Philadelphia to Adam Reinhardt and Anna Marie Schritz, German immigrants. His father died when he was young, and Frank would take on the surname of his stepfather, William Lenz, another German immigrant. From a young age, Lenz took up cycling, riding his first bike at 17 in 1884. Lenz joined a cycling club and began riding the backroads of Pennsylvania. Like any true cyclist of the time, he rode the enormous wheeled penny farthing bicycle, deriding the safety of the newly invented safety bicycles with smaller wheels and more comfortable rides. In 1887, the Bulletin newspaper in Pittsburgh covered Lenz. He rides with dash and daring that can almost be called recklessness, it said, on an ordinary or penny farthing bike with a 56-inch diameter wheel. Lenz, the report said, surmounts curbstones and dashes over objects with an ease and abandon that calls forth admiration from even old and experienced riders. Lenz's first bicycle was a Colombian expert, and once he had bought it with nearly 10% of his yearly salary as an accountant, he spent almost every spare minute on it. He soon began making a name for himself in the bicycling scene, completing his first century ride, 100 miles, in 1887 on rough roads. His handlebars snapped mid-journey. 2 months later, he rode to New York City and back, a journey of over 700 miles. He also began participating in road races. Lenz did well, even managing an upset when he bested the local champ by 3 yards in a 2-mile race in October. His second season went even better, and the Bulletin declared him a rising luminary in the racing field. But Lenz wasn't satisfied with winning local races. A big race was being held in conjunction with the International Industrial Fair in Buffalo, New York, including a 100-mile race from Erie to Buffalo, advertised as the World's Cycling Tournament. One writer gushed that not a champion for any distance in any country would miss it. Despite a downpour, Lenz and 14 other men struggled through the mud. He led for portions, but ultimately came in third. In Buffalo, he saw a number of famous bicycles, including an 1865 Velocipede and a nickel-plated Colombian expert that belonged to Thomas Stevens. Between 1884 and 1887, Stevens had become famous as the Globe Girdler when he rode the big-wheeled bicycle around the whole world. Stevens had published accounts of his journey in Outing magazine. Lenz longed for that life and the speaking tours that came afterwards. Racing, Lenz knew, would never pay the bills. What he needed was to be sponsored by a magazine like Stevens and to do something audacious and exciting. In 1889, he bought his first camera, causing quite a sensation when he appeared with a big camera case and tripod strapped on his back. Only recently had both cycling tech and photography tech advanced to a point where it was practical to carry a camera to take snapshots. With his wooden Blair camera in hand, Lenz would find a shot, dismount, and take a picture in only a few minutes. In August, he rode to New York again, but this time made about 150 exposures on plates. His large pack, a reporter noted, meant that he was taken for a peddler, drummer, or a quack doctor. His plan for a worldwide tour was cemented: ride around the world and document it with stunning, modern photographs. Lenz trained for the journey by taking longer treks afield. In August of 1891, he and his friend Charlie Petticord biked 1,200 miles to New Orleans. They took a steamer back. On this trip, he hoped to make a name for himself, both as a cyclist and as a photographer, to use as a springboard for his more ambitious goal. Cycling, in the middle of its greatest craze, made Tales of Globetrotting Journey a good sell. Lenz's pitch was carefully crafted. He planned a route of 20,000 miles, far surpassing Stevens, that he hoped to make in 2 years. Lenz had stopped racing, but at 24 kept up an admirable reputation for strength and endurance. "I doubt if Lenz has an equal in America," one reporter marveled after seeing him ride with his 20-pound camera. He'd also become a resourceful photographer and learned to photograph himself while riding his bike by rigging a rubber tube that would cause the camera to take a snap as he rode over it. Lenz was determined. At the end of one letter, he wrote, "I will go if I have to go alone and unaided. The world I will see." And his work paid off. Outing magazine, the same magazine which had carried Stevens' accounts, agreed to pay Lenz for articles and photographs of his trip if he would ride a Victory safety bicycle. Both Lenz's mother and his boss did their best to talk him out of the scheme, but as an outing reporter noted, Lenz was entirely wrapped up in the idea. Lenz worked out a deal for the magazine to cover $2,000 in traveling expenses and had the magazine take out a $3,000 life insurance policy payable to his mother, and just in case. He ordered a custom Victory bicycle and got his passport in order. Initially, he'd expected to make the trek with Petticord, but Petticord finally balked, so resolved to go it alone. He bought a new film camera and used a music box to devise a timer. As he prepared to go, friends held farewell parties. The Keystone Bicycle Club presented Lenz with an engraved Smith & Wesson revolver. On May 9, 1892, newspapers abounded with coverage as he prepared to leave. "Lenz's trip is of interest to everybody who admires courage and manly strength," read the bulletin. "Truly, the world moves, and the bicycle is responsible for much of that motion." He officially departed on May 15th, to the cries of around 800 well-wishers. "Are you sure you'll make it back?" a young man asked. "I shall succeed if it takes a lifetime," Lenz answered. He grabbed his passport in Philadelphia before riding to New York City, where he would begin his trip west. Some criticized the journey and Lenz's plans. It was foolish to use pneumatic tires on rough roads, which will make touring an impossibility in any foreign land beyond communication with European civilization. The reporter openly wondered what benefit is to be derived from this trip. Others were more charitable, writing that he was a plucky young fellow for undertaking such a long and perilous trip, and that there was a noble purpose in proving the safety bicycle was an easy and healthful manner of traveling and sightseeing. He left New York City on June 4th, bound for San Francisco. While Lenz had been planning, another duo of American cyclists had begun a round-the-world trip the other direction on a whim. William Sackleben of Alton, Illinois, and Thomas Allen of Ferguson, Missouri, had gone to Europe to sightsee when it suddenly occurred to them to try bicycling from Liverpool, where they landed in England, all the way across Europe, Asia, and the United States. They made a deal with the Penny Illustrated paper in London and purchased 2 of Kodak's new film cameras. On June 4th, as Lenz left New York, they were just passing from Russia into China. They would finally reach New York City and thus complete their journey in June 1893. They missed Lenz by less than 2 weeks. He had traveled 5,000 miles in the United States, from New York City to Niagara Falls, Chicago, Minneapolis, and Miles City, Montana, before taking a detour to see Yellowstone National Park, where he was stuck for a day when it snowed. He declared a malted drink in Racine the most invigorating and refreshing drink I have ever tasted. At one point, while riding on a railroad bridge in Wisconsin, an express train came around the corner, forcing him to sit on the edge, his bike dangling by one hand while the other clung to the railroad tie. A reporter who caught him in Granite Falls, Minnesota, declared him the greatest adventurer in his line of this country, while another said, "In our estimation, he has more sand than sense." He got plenty of sand in Washington, where he was forced to walk 100 miles in 5 days in a sandstorm. He spent a night in jail in San Francisco after having a drink or two too many. From San Francisco, he went by boat to Honolulu, rode his bike around the island, and then got back on the boat to Yokohama, Japan. There he faced his first culture shocks, from chopsticks to co-ed nude bathing. He rode nearly 1,000 miles over 17.5 days before reaching Nagasaki. From there he sailed to Shanghai, China. His itinerary took him through some of the most dangerous parts of China, rife with anti-foreigner sentiment, and everyone he spoke to tried to talk him into a different route. He refused, only altering his route slightly as he planned to travel to Burma and then follow the coast to India. Weather slowed him down, as did the Chinese antagonism towards foreigners. He twice used my revolver to frighten off Chinese who stoned him. He was also a frequent victim of theft and lost his tripod, tools, opera glasses, and a spool of film. Mobs of locals followed him wherever he went. Lenz said, "The curiosity of the Chinese is something fearful." He survived by bicycling from missionary to missionary, at least until he began to grow used to their behavior and risked staying at local inns. The Chinese roads were bad for cycling, forcing Lenz to walk for long stretches. At one point, he found himself surrounded by a large number of laborers, armed with 2 scores of hoes and clubs, more than a match for his single revolver. He was knocked in the head with a hoe and his camera smashed. One of the men managed to calm the crowd for a moment, and then Lenz proceeded to put on a show on the bicycle, finally eliciting laughs rather than cries of anger. Giving demonstrations became a habit and a means of appeasing locals' curiosity. Finally, he reached Burma, where he was forced to abandon cycling for a time thanks to mountainous terrain and the rain. He tried to go to India overland, but after a bout of malaria turned to Rangoon, and from there went by ship to Calcutta, India. He had by then traveled some 10,000 miles. It seemed to him that he had left the most hostile part of the journey behind him. While he was 6 months behind schedule, his adventures were earning raves back in the United States. "He will undoubtedly receive the plaudits of every wheelman he meets," a reporter wrote in the Chicago Inter-Ocean. India was by comparison to China safe under British rule. He met many more friendly faces as he crossed northern India. He was able to tour, seeing the Ganges and the Taj Mahal. In mid-December, he entered the desert of Balochistan in modern Pakistan, where he was briefly stranded without food or water. He was obliged to hire a camel and a driver to help him through the remaining 400 miles of desert. He passed into Persia a few days after New Year's Eve, 1894. He briefly took a ship along the Persian Gulf, weighing his desire to cycle against falling further behind schedule. Instead of traversing the deserts of the Middle East, he headed north, planning on turning west across Turkey and the Ottoman Empire before finally reaching Europe, where he was scheduled to meet American friends for the final leg of his journey. Traveling between missionaries, telegraph stations, and diplomats, he met the Crown Prince of Persia in Tabriz. Before he entered Turkey, many of the people he met again attempted to get him to alter his route, to reach Europe by the longer but safer path through Russia rather than the Ottoman Empire. But he again refused. He was excited to reach Europe, his friend Charlie, and to visit Germany, the land of his forefathers. Before he left Tabriz, he sent a letter. "It's been a long while since I've tasted pie and ice cream. Nothing but sour cream and black bread most of the time now. But I'm only 900 miles from Constantinople." He left Tabriz in late April, 1894. In America, fears for Lenz's life had already filled the heart of his mother several times, when long breaks came between his letters. But by October 1894, he had been silent for nearly 6 months. On October 12th, an Ohio newspaper declared Frank Lenz is lost. A lawyer and family friend had just sent a request to the State Department to demand an investigation into Lenz's disappearance. No one had heard from Lenz since he left Tabriz, headed for Erzurum, Turkey. Turkey was then a dangerous place as the Ottoman Empire struggled against its decline. The region that Lenz was lost in was sliding into chaos, with powerful Kurdish warlords and Turkish soldiers massacring Armenians, not to mention the constant ambushes and robberies of highwaymen. Perhaps many thought he had been kidnapped. Some in the States suggested that Lenz's silence was merely a ploy to increase magazine sales. His friend Charlie brushed that off. "He knows silence would kill his mother." Outing magazine was getting anxious too, and even falsely reported Lenz's arrival in Constantinople in July to allay fears. As fears reached a fever pitch and reports appeared in newspapers, Acting Secretary of State Edwin Oule ordered American ministers in Persia and the Ottoman Empire to begin investigating. In November, Outing finally reported the information it had regarding his last communication. Outing suggested Lenz had voluntarily gone into hiding. William Sachleben, who had narrowly missed meeting Lenz in China, immediately suspected murder by lawless Kurds. Sachleben's adventuring partner Allen thought it was possible that Lenz hadn't prepared himself for the local customs and possibly quarreled with the local. Others speculated Lenz had fallen ill and died or had a terrible accident. The only hope of his survival seemed to be that he had been taken captive. As diplomatic channels moved slowly, many called for a private expedition to find Lenz. His friends organized a committee, and finally Outing hired Sachleben to find Lenz. They learned that Lenz had reached Turkey in May before disappearing. Sachleben finally left on March 2, 1895, 10 months after Lenz's last message. 3 weeks later, he was in Constantinople. Getting into Ottoman Armenia was a daunting task. The Sultan had effectively closed it off since August 1894. Some 10,000 Armenians had been massacred since. It took a month of diplomatic wrangling. Sachleben cursed the American minister, but Sachleben finally managed to get himself into Armenia. By the time he got there, rumors surrounding Lenz's death were everywhere. The British consul in Erzurum had even forwarded the names of 6 Kurds he believed had been involved in Lenz's death to the Americans. Sachleben began gathering more information, turning his investigation against a local Kurdish chief and an officer in the Turkish army called Musto. The evidence said Lenz was killed just outside a small village where the chief lived. Impatient as the Turkish government dithered, Sachleben even demanded at one point that a warship be sent to Constantinople to force their hand. He finally arrived with a Turkish entourage in September 1895, more than a year after Lenz was last seen. The investigation was frustrating for Sachleben. Making friends with Armenians, he had been able to find several pieces of Lenz's belongings, but the Turks saw the fact that the Armenians had the items as proof of their guilt. Sachleben wrote a report claiming that he had not assumed any one point without a witness. According to the report, Lenz had reached the village on May 9th. He stayed in a local home, not feeling well. The Kurdish chief seized Lenz's revolver and demanded that Lenz open it up. He refused and eventually went back to sleep. "Is he a king that he cannot sit up and talk with us?" the chief demanded. The next morning, some of the Kurds ambushed Lenz to steal his belongings, his shiny nickel bicycle, which they believed was silver, as well as his revolver, money, and watch. They struck his hand with a sword so he couldn't draw his gun. After robbing him, they stabbed him and buried him. Before he left, Sachleben witnessed a massacre of several hundred Armenians. Pictures he took were later published in the West. Despite letters from local Armenians and corroborating evidence from a Kurd, the official government response was to pin the blame on the Armenians, claiming that there are signs that the Armenians may have committed this murder for political fodder to be used against Muslims. Several of the Armenians arrested died in prison without trial. The Kurdish chief, though arrested, somehow escaped from prison. Sakleben finally left Turkey at the end of February 1896. Though disappointed in what he had accomplished, he said of Lenz, "In my opinion, he was the bravest man that ever strode a bicycle. Had he survived another week, chances are he would have lived to tell exactly what it feels like to travel around the world alone on a wheel." Through the entire investigation, Outing continued to publish Lenz's journey from previous dispatches and a special correspondent, only concluding in January 1897. Despite what information they could gain in that remote part of Turkey, the details of Lenz's death are still not certain. The locals, fearful for their own lives, had reason to lie, and the people that were accused quickly left Turkey. The Turkish government did eventually pay an indemnity of $7,500 to Lenz's mother in 1901. In the wake of his death, he faced accusations about his character, people arguing that his trip was reckless and foolish. One cyclist remembers telling him, "You'll surely be killed in Asia. You are so stubborn." To which he replied, "I expect to be." His name quickly faded from the newspapers. Once one of the most famous wheelmen in the world just disappeared into the fog of history. So what do you think? Was his trip a reckless lark, or was it a worthy adventure? I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop, book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.